The fear that you cannot be someone, a better man, a stronger person, a more grounded human, is often not a warning, but a signpost. It reveals not your limits, but your longings. And yet, so many men treat that fear like a full stop, as if the mere presence of doubt is evidence that they're not cut out for the path they feel drawn to. But let me suggest something else. What if that fear is precisely the proof that you are meant to walk that path? Fear, particularly fear of personal transformation, is a deeply misunderstood emotion. It masquerades as a red light, but in most cases, it's a flare fired by your better self, trying to get your attention. It says, this matters. That uneasy feeling you get when you imagine being more responsible, more vulnerable, more present, that's not proof you're incapable. That's proof it's important. I've spoken with countless men who carry this quiet anxiety. They'll say things like, I want to be a better father, or I wish I could lead with more integrity, or I'm not the man I want to be. But underneath those statements is something much deeper. A fear that they might try and fail, that they'll reach for a version of themselves they can't actually become. And so they hold back. They stay in the roles they know, in the identities that feel safe, even if those identities are slowly eroding their sense of meaning. But let me say this clearly, fear is not the enemy, paralysis is. And paralysis often comes not because the goal is too far, in the tears you didn't wipe away too quickly. The version of you that you're afraid to reach for is already whispering. And fear is how we often hear him for the first time. We also need to stop seeing fear as weakness. Fear means you care. Fear means there's something at stake. Indifference is what we should be afraid of. That slow hollowing of the self when we stop imagining who we could become. That's the real danger, not the fear of failure, but the fear of trying. Of course, there's a reason we're afraid. Because to become the person you fear you can't be, you will have to leave behind some of the armor you've worn. Maybe that armor kept you safe in the past. Maybe it helped you survive childhood or social pressure or the burden of low expectations. But at some point, that armor becomes a cage. And to step into who you're meant to be, you'll have to step out of who you've pretended to be. And I'll tell you something else. People will notice. When a man starts becoming more honest, more emotionally available, more aligned, it unsettles the people around him. Not everyone will cheer you on. Some will question your motives. Others will mock your vulnerability. But listen, their discomfort is not your cue to retreat. It's your cue to keep going. Their resistance is not a verdict on your path. It's a reflection of their own unexamined fear. Now, I'm not promising that this journey is clean or linear. It isn't. You will stumble. You will overcorrect. You will revert to old habits. But every step forward rewires something deeper. You begin to build trust in yourself, not the performative kind that's about control and dominance, but the real kind, the trust that says, I can face discomfort. I can own my failures. I can change. There is no final version of you waiting at the end of some heroic quest. There's just the daily work of becoming, of facing yourself honestly and choosing not to shrink from what you see. That fear you feel, it doesn't mean stop. It means start. And if you need a place to begin with the question, what would it look like to act today? In one small way, like the man I believe I might become, if I dared. Because the only way to become the person you fear you can't be is to start behaving like he's already in the room. You don't rise above your identity, you expand it. That's the truth most of us avoid because it's harder than just trying harder. We're told again and again that effort is everything, work on yourself, push harder, do more. But effort alone, without a shift in how you see yourself, eventually hits a wall. And that wall isn't laziness or lack of discipline, it's identity. You fear you can't become a certain kind of man, not because you're incapable, but because deep down, you don't believe that kind of man is you. That belief is the real barrier, not talent, not intelligence, not motivation, belief. And belief is shaped by your identity, the internal story you carry about who you are and who you're not. Many men have inherited an identity that is far too narrow for the lives they actually want to live. From a young age, the social script is handed down like a family heirloom. Be strong, don't show weakness, compete, don't cry, provide, don't need. And over time, we absorb the lesson that certain emotions are off limits, certain paths are unavailable, and certain kinds of personal transformation are for other people, not us. So when we talk about becoming the person we fear we can't be, what we're really talking about is identity repair, not reinvention, not performance, not a mask, repair, expansion, growing into a version of yourself that's more whole, not more polished. Because here's what often happens. A man begins to want something more. He wants to be more emotionally available. He wants to be a more present father. He wants to feel deeply, to speak honestly, to build real relationships. But then the fear kicks in. That's not me. I wouldn't know where to begin. What if I try and fail? And beneath that, the more painful voice, what if I'm not enough? That fear isn't irrational. It's identity doing its job, keeping you within the boundaries it knows. But here's the thing. Your identity was shaped by people, places, and systems that didn't always have your flourishing in mind. So if you've never questioned your identity, chances are it's not yours. You're just wearing it. And that's why the work is not just about action. It's about excavation. You have to look back. You have to ask, who told me what it means to be a man? What rewards was I given for emotional detachment? What punishments did I face for vulnerability? What kind of man did I believe I had to be just to survive in my home, in my school, in my community? It takes courage to ask those questions because the answers aren't always pretty. Sometimes we discover that what we thought was strength was really fear. And what we called independence was actually isolation. What we admired in ourselves was just armor. And facing that, honestly, without shame, is the beginning of transformation. But once you start that process, something powerful happens. You begin to realize that identity is not fixed. It's not a jail cell. It's a container. And containers can be stretched, changed, reinforced. Becoming the person you fear you can't be isn't about changing who you are. It's about becoming more of who you are under the surface, beneath the mask. The parts of you that you've disowned or ignored or buried, they don't go away. They just wait. And at some point, if you want to grow, you have to stop pretending they don't exist. You don't need to become a different man. You need to become a fuller one. That's the difference between achievement and maturity. Achievement asks, how much can I do? Maturity asks, how much of myself am I willing to reclaim? Reclaiming yourself means recognizing that emotional fluency is not weakness, it's literacy. That tenderness is not a liability, it's a strength. That asking for help is not failure, it's wisdom. None of this is about abandoning responsibility or resilience. It's about redefining them. Real resilience isn't suppression, it's integration. It's knowing your anger and your compassion, your drive and your self-doubt, your strength and your softness, not choosing one over the other, but holding them both in tension, in truth. Because if you're only living from one part of yourself, the socially acceptable part, the tough part, the invulnerable part, then you're not living fully, you're surviving. And that survival might work for a while. You might succeed, impress, endure, but it will cost you. In intimacy, in purpose, in peace. So the question becomes, are you willing to let go of who you were told to be in order to become who you actually are? Because that's the fear we rarely name. The fear that becoming more of yourself might make you unrecognizable to others, that you'll lose belonging, that you'll lose control. But what's the alternative? A life of quiet performance? A soul half asleep? You fear you can't become that person because part of you already knows how much it would demand. Not just effort, not just change, but honesty, humility, and above all, identity repair. But that's the path. That's the invitation to become a man who is no longer hiding from himself, who owns his story, who walks forward, not perfectly, but fully. Not because it's easy. We tend to think of becoming someone new as a kind of cinematic moment, some great turning point where everything changes in a flash. But in real life, that's rarely how it works. In fact, the person you fear you can't be, the one you imagine as more grounded, more courageous, more emotionally whole, isn't waiting at the end of a single transformation. He's waiting at the end of 1,000 small conscious choices. We've been sold this idea of radical reinvention, that growth must be dramatic to be real, that you have to walk away from your life, reinvent your identity, or declare some bold new purpose in a single striking act. But in reality, the process is often quiet. It's not a leap, but a slow, deliberate walk forward. A series of decisions made in the spaces where no one's clapping and no one's watching. You become the man you long to be in moments that seem utterly ordinary. It happens when you choose to stay in a difficult conversation instead of shutting down. It happens when you admit that you're wrong, even though it bruises your ego. It happens when you get up in the morning and take care of yourself, not because someone told you to, but because you've decided you're worth caring for. These are not glamorous acts. No one hands out medals for emotional honesty or self-discipline, but they are the acts that change the architecture of who you are. And here's the truth. Most of the time, no one will notice. You will grow and it won't be visible to the people around you, at least not at first, but you will feel it in how you speak, in how you hold yourself, in how you walk into a room without needing to prove anything, and how you leave a room without taking energy from it. There's a reason we often fear we can't become that version of ourselves, because it takes a kind of sustained discomfort, a kind of inner discipline that few people talk about. You don't get to escape your patterns by intellectualizing them. You have to live your way into something new. That means catching yourself in old habits, the quick anger, the sarcasm, the silence, and choosing in that moment to do something different. Not perfect, just different, just better. And you won't always get it right. Some days you'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 2 steps back and 1 shaky step forward. But that too is part of it, because becoming isn't about achieving some flawless ideal. It's about becoming more integrated, more honest, more aligned with the person you are when no one else is in the room. And I want to be clear about something. This isn't a call to self-optimization for its own sake. It's not about hacking your life into a tighter, more efficient version of you. It's about integrity, living in a way that matches your values, even when, especially when, no one's there to enforce them. Sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that seem the least significant. When you're tired, when you've had a long day, when you just want to numb out or disappear, and instead you pick up the phone and call a friend you've been neglecting, or you apologize to your child, or you sit quietly with your discomfort instead of rushing to fill the silence. Those are the defining moments, not the big speech, not the breakthrough therapy session, but the quiet acts of accountability that slowly build a self you can trust. And I say build because this isn't something you stumble into. You don't discover this person. You build him one choice at a time. The man you fear you can't be isn't unreachable. He's just unfamiliar. And you start becoming him the moment you stop waiting for permission and start acting as if he's already inside you, waiting for you to make room. If you're wondering where to start small. Pick one thing you usually avoid and move toward it. One conversation, one habit, one moment of presence. You don't need to do everything, just do the next right thing again and again. You'll be amazed at how much changes when you stop chasing transformation and start practicing consistency. And when you inevitably fall short, and you will, don't let that be the story. Don't confuse failure with finality. Becoming is messy, it's uneven, but it is also deeply, profoundly possible, because who you fear you can't be is exactly who you were meant to become. Too many men today are trying to become someone better, stronger, wiser, completely on their own. There's a stubborn pride in that, of course. The ideal of the self-made man runs deep. We're taught to fix ourselves in silence, to soldier on through our struggles, and to treat needing help as a kind of moral failure. But if you really pause and look closely, you'll see how damaging that belief is. No one becomes alone. No man becomes the person he fears he can't be without the support, influence, and connection of others. We like to think of growth as a solo journey. You, your thoughts, your goals, your grind. That's comforting in a way because it keeps things under your control. You don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to risk rejection or judgment. But the truth is, when you try to go it alone, you're not strong. You're just isolated. And that isolation, for men especially, can be quietly corrosive. We are social beings. We become who we are through relationship, through friction, through feedback, through support. Think about who you admire, truly. A coach, a father, a teacher, a friend, a mentor. You'll realize that behind every man of substance, every man who's living a life of meaning, there was someone else who believed in him before he believed in himself. Someone who called him out when he was shrinking. Someone who called him up when he was playing small. We don't just need connection for comfort, we need it for clarity. Sometimes we only see who we could be through the eyes of someone who sees more in us than we do. And this isn't about therapy necessarily, though that may be part of it. It's not even just about friendship. It's about fraternity in the truest sense, having men around you who want your growth as much as you do and who aren't afraid to challenge you into it. That kind of relational accountability is rare, but when you find it, it changes you. Iron sharpens iron, not because one piece is stronger, but because they collide. The friction is what reveals the edge. Becoming the man you fear you can't be will require you to admit something difficult. You can't get there alone. And that's not a failure. That's a human truth. It takes courage to let someone see the parts of you you're ashamed of. It takes humility to ask for help, but it also takes maturity to realize that going farther will require walking with others. The lone wolf story is romantic until you see how many of those wolves die in silence. There's a quiet epidemic among men, not of violence or laziness, though those are symptoms, but of disconnection. And what often looks like apathy is really loneliness. What looks like anger is often grief. We don't talk about these things, not because we don't feel them, but because we've been trained to see emotional honesty as weakness. So we bottle it up. We armor ourselves with sarcasm or silence. We become strangers to our own inner lives. And then we wonder why we feel hollow. You can't become someone new while clinging to old protections. You can't step into a bigger life while hiding behind smaller fears. And sometimes what's needed isn't more effort, it's more exposure. Let people in. Ask the awkward question. Make the vulnerable call. Invite someone to walk alongside you. If you want to become the person you fear you can't be, don't just look inward, look around. Who's walking with you? Who are you learning from? Who's challenging your assumptions, your habits, your blind spots? This kind of connection isn't easy. It won't come from scrolling or networking or casual banter. It takes intentionality, it takes honesty, and it takes time.